The Buffalo Bills finished the 2024 season with a 13-4 record and made the playoffs for the sixth straight year. And unfortunately for Bills players and Bills Mafia, they lost to the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs for the fourth time in 5 years. It was a bitter defeat in the AFC Championship game as they lost by a score of 32-29 and were sent home again without a trip to the Super Bowl. And obviously that was a brutal loss, especially with how it happened, but if there was any silver lining within that game and ultimately within the 2024 season, it's that last year was supposed to be a reset year where a lot was not expected of the Buffalo Bills. They were in a transition period as they were moving on from veterans like Stephon Diggs, Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, Mitch Morse, Gabe Davis, and plenty of others, yet still made it to the AFC Championship game. This team had over $75 million in dead cap money in 2024, which was third in the NFL, and to me, at least with where this roster was, outperformed the expectations they had entering the year. But entering 2025, this team had more money to work with and was a lot more active in free agency than they were 1 year ago. And they're coming off of their first trip to the AFC Championship game since 2020, and this roster is really talented. And the big question for the 2025 Bills is, can they finally get over the hump? Well, we're going to break everything down with the Bills in today's video. If you could like the video before we start, I would really appreciate it, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video by discussing what the Bills did in free agency, both in terms of who they brought in and who they lost. And despite Buffalo being in an obvious win-now mode, I thought they made a considerable amount of moves in free agency, all things considered. Typically, when a team is all in like Buffalo and has guys like Josh Allen and Deion Dawkins locked up, the common belief is that those types of teams are not going to be all that active in free agency. But there's always a lot of maneuvering around the cap, and there's a reason that Buffalo is contending year in and year out, and it's not just due to Josh Allen. He, of course, plays a monumental part in this, but Brandon Beane is one of the best GMs in the league, and the largest contract they handed out in terms of average annual value was a 1-year $12.6 million deal with pass rusher Joey Bosa. However, in terms of actual values and with guarantees, they brought in receiver Josh Palmer on a 3-year $29 million deal, and Rams pass rusher Michael Hoyt on a 3-year $21 million deal. And with Joey Bosa specifically, this is a medium-risk, high-reward signing. They released Von Miller this offseason, and when Von signed the big 6-year $120 million deal a couple of years ago, it was always going to be a 3-year deal. The Bills were not going to pay him $32 million in 2027 when he would be 38 years old. That was never the plan. So they brought in Joey Bosa, who is a 5-time Pro Bowler and is a good player when healthy, but that's a huge battle in itself as he has played just 28 games over the last 3 years. And over the last 3 years, he's been more in a designated pass rushing role than ever, and I fully expect that to continue in 2025 with Buffalo. For reference, over the last 3 years of the snaps he's played, about 70% are plays where the opposing team throws the football, and that's by design. The biggest thing with the Bosa signing is keeping him healthy until January. That's it. This team signed him to get after 8 in purple and 15 in red when it matters most. They also brought in 2 receivers in Josh Palmer and Elijah Moore to continue the everybody eats offense. The Bills, of course, traded for Amari Cooper during the 2024 season, and Cooper was on an expiring contract, so there was no release from the Bills because of a large cap or anything. His contract just ran out. And unfortunately for Amari, no team has picked him up at the time of this video release. The Bills gave Josh Palmer a 3-year deal, and Palmer has averaged 650 yards per year over the last 3 years, and I think that's about what he'll average in Buffalo. He had a productive 2023 season in the time he played, but I think he's a solid number 2 receiver and will be just 26 years old this fall, so if he works out and becomes a Grand Slam signing, then this will be a huge steal for Buffalo because they're paying him an average of just $9.7 million per year. Elijah Moore was signed to a 1-year $2.5 million contract, and I've never been the biggest Elijah Moore fan, and there's a reason he was given a 1-year $2.5 million contract in free agency, despite having back-to-back years of over 100 targets. It's because he's not very good, and I would be surprised if he has more than 35 or 40 receptions this year for Buffalo. Now, Michael Hoyt is suspended for the first 6 games of the year for PEDs, but Hoyt is a very interesting player, and I've been really interested in his career development over the past few years because of how he was used in LA. A lot of the time, the Rams used a 310-pound player as a stand-up defensive lineman, and the results were, all things considered, pretty good. And Buffalo does not have a true number one go-to guy to get after the quarterback the way the other teams around the NFL do, so I will be interested to see how they deploy Hoyt when he comes back from suspension. Now, like we said with Buffalo, they are a very good football team, obviously, but they do not have a singular elite pass rusher the way other teams around the NFL do. And I know it's not ideal to have Michael Hoyt suspended for the first 6 games, but the biggest thing for me for Buffalo this year is simply staying healthy until they get to the postseason. This should not be a hot take, but I think Buffalo is the most clear preseason pick to win any of the 8 divisions in football, and as long as they enter January with a healthy rotation of pass rushers, they're going to be fine. Greg Rousseau is only 25 years old despite having been in the league since 2021 and is only 7 months older than 2024 Defensive Rookie of the Year Jared Verse. My point is, despite Rousseau entering year 5, there is still room for him to grow as a player, and he had a career high in pressures last year with 63 and also had a career high in quarterback hits with 24. Joey Bosa and Greg Rousseau getting after the quarterback in the postseason is not ideal for an opposing offensive line, especially when third-round rookie Landon Jackson and even Ed Oliver from the interior are also going to have roles within this too. Now, one area the Bills need to improve on in 2025 is the secondary. I have no concerns with Christian Benford and Taron Johnson, as I do believe these 2 players are 2 of the most underappreciated players in all of football, but first-round corner Maxwell Hairston is going to have a lot on his plate, and early. Teams would much rather target a first-round rookie corner than go after Christian Benford, who had an opposing passer rating of just 72.3 when targeted in 2024. For reference, the 2024 DPOI in Pat Surtain had an opposing passer rating of 61.1 when targeted last year, and if there is one area Buffalo can improve on in 2025, it is the secondary outside of Benford and Taron Johnson. Buffalo also finished 22nd in EPA per passing play defensively last year, and obviously when the offense is on an 8-game 30-point streak like they were last year, well, a lot of the problems get masked by winning, which Buffalo obviously does a lot of, or by the media giving a lot of attention to your MVP winning quarterback. Now, Buffalo did not bring back Rasul Douglas, but he was a much different player in 2024 than he was in 2023, and there was a reason they didn't bring him back to begin with. He'll be 30 in August, and he showed signs of slowing down last year, and there was a clear regression from 2023 to 2024, and long story short, the NFL is a business, and Maxwell Hairston, you're up, let's see what you have. One area of the Bills' defense that I personally underestimated last year at times, and enough credit cannot be given to the defense, is creating timely turnovers. This team had an insane plus 24 turnover margin last year, and as you saw during the Ravens playoff game, whether it was a play against Lamar or a play against Mark Andrews, this team knows how to create turnovers, and that's huge. And I'm not just saying this to get Bills fans hyped for the 25 season, but I do think this team improved quite a bit on the defensive side of the football from last year to this year. They had 3 selections in the top 100 they used all on the defensive side of the football, and I had all 3 players in Maxwell Hairston, TJ Sanders, and Landon Jackson all in my top 61 of my top 150 big board, and this is for a unit that was a lot better than most in 2024. And my big thing with the Bills entering 2025 is this is a team that lost in the AFC Championship game by a field goal, yet they improved their roster, and I didn't think the 2024 Bills were as talented as previous Bills teams heading into last year, and they still won not 1, but 2 playoff games. And when you look at the Bills defense entering this year, truly, what are the weaknesses? Even if you want to say a top-tier pass rusher, I firmly believe the depth this team has makes up for it, and with the improvements they made this offseason, specifically on the defensive side of the ball, what is stopping this team from getting over the hump and winning the Super Bowl this year? For the 2025 Bills draft class, I want to start this off and say that I don't think there's going to be that much rookie impact from the Bills draft class this year, but I also want to emphasize that just because I don't think there's going to be that much impact doesn't mean that they're all going to be draft busts, and I would point to their class from last year and ask, really, what player impacted the Bills in a substantial way from the 2024 draft class? Now, I know Keon Coleman had over 500 yards receiving, but was he truly an impact player that the Bills would not have won 13 games without? No, and that's kind of what what I'm referring to. When you are selecting at the end of the first round year after year after year because you are as successful as the Bills are, naturally you're not going to draft the Micah Parsons or the Jamar Chases or those types of players when you're selecting at 28, 29, 30, wherever, and then subsequently 62, 64, and then 94 and the 96 in the third round, and you get the point. Now, Buffalo did trade up for TJ Sanders in the second round, and we'll address TJ Sanders in a minute, but for Maxwell Hairston specifically, the corner they selected in the first round, I do think he will be the most productive rookie of the Bills, not surprisingly because he's going to receive the most playing time, but I think he's going to get tested quite a bit, and I think there is room for him to have a 3 or 4 interception rookie season because Maxwell was a really productive player at Kentucky when targeted, and during the 2024 season, he did miss some time with Kentucky last year, but he was only targeted 22 times and only allowed 12 receptions. Unfortunately, he allowed a couple of big plays when he was targeted, but Maxwell was a really productive player for Kentucky in 24 and especially in 2023, and I think he will prove to be a really good player for the Bills in the long run. The one thing that I do worry about with Hairston is his size because he is a slender corner, but what is kind of surprising that a lot of people may not know is he's a really solid press corner, but he's not the best tackler despite being a really good press corner and really jamming receivers at the line. Now, obviously when you're in Buffalo in late December and January, and given that they are building the new stadium, which will also be outside, and by the way, I'm a big fan of keeping the Bills outside, that is definitely something to note with the Maxwell Hairston selection. And subsequently, I do think teams are going to try to run the football or really throw the football at Maxwell Hairston early and often and basically say, hey, we know you are a good cover corner, but at times you struggle to make the tackles consistently, so we're going to do everything we can to try to make you struggle at the NFL level. Now, ultimately, I do think Maxwell Hairston will be fine. He will turn 22 before the season starts, and I think he has a pretty high ceiling, all things considered. TJ Sanders was their second-round pick, and they had 2 second-round picks because of the Stephon Diggs trade last offseason, which was for a 2025 second-round pick, and I really like the TJ Sanders selection, at least with a long-term vision, although I don't think he's going to be all that productive in year 1. What has to be remembered that we preach all the time on the channel is a lot of the time interior offensive and defensive linemen take a year or two to get really adjusted to the NFL level, and there were times late in games at South Carolina where TJ Sanders was not the same player that he was early in games, and I think at best he will be a rotational player. But what I also want to reemphasize is when we're in January and it's late in the fourth quarter and it's, January 20th, it's, -2 degrees with wind chill, snow's blowing around, and we have to get after 8 in purple or 15 in red, we're going to have our best 4 or 5 guys get after the quarterback that are all relatively fresh because of the depth this defensive line has. So while I don't think TJ Sanders is going to come in and have a 64 total tackles, 6.5 sack rookie season along with 45 pressures, I think the plays that he will play are going to be substantial and that he will be a pretty contributive piece, and that Bills fans are going to love who he becomes by season's end. And again, remember, this is a pick for the long run, not a player where we need in week 1 to stop the Ravens and to stop Lamar Jackson, because if we don't stop Lamar Jackson in week 1, we're not going to get the home field advantage. So I like the TJ Sanders selection for the long run. I just don't think he's going to be all that productive, especially in the first half of 2025. More or less the same concept applies to Landon Jackson, although I will say for Landon specifically, I really like him in this defense, especially with setting a hard edge in the run game. And we talked about Joey Bosa being a DPR, a designated pass rusher. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Landon Jackson in those early downs where teams are going to try to run the football, and we want a 6'5", 260-pound player in there that can set a hard edge and force him back into the teeth of the defense to where we can have Terrell Bernard and Matt Milano and Ed Oliver and everybody in the middle of that defense crash in because of the hard edge that Landon Jackson is going to set. And again, from a statistical standpoint, I don't think Landon Jackson is going to have that big of an impact, but I think he's going to be a player that Bills Mafia is going to love because in a lot of ways, he's going to represent Western New York. He's going to be tough, he's going to be gritty, and he's going to be the dirty workman of this defense in 2025. And again, I don't think that's going to represent all that much in the stat sheet, but from a long-term perspective, by bringing in Maxwell Hairston, TJ Sanders, and Landon Jackson, and specifically with Sanders and Jackson, I think those guys will start in 2026 and beyond. I thought the Bills absolutely killed it with with their first 3 picks. Where their draft went from an A or an A plus level, more so the A level, but where it went from an A to an A minus was selecting Deone Walker with the 110th pick. Deone Walker did not have a good year in 2024 with Kentucky, and he is enormous as a football player, but a lot of the times when you have these enormous 6'6", 6'7" linemen, they lose the leverage battle a lot, and that was what happened and what showed up consistently on Walker's tape, and I don't think that he's going to go from a liability at the college level to an all-pro or a Pro Bowl player at the NFL level, so I just don't think there's going to be that much production from Deone Walker. But for the first 3 selections and what the Bills did in the top 100, I absolutely love what Brandon Beane did in the 2025 draft. The Bills had 5 selections after the pick 170 mark, and anytime you're selecting after that mark, you're hoping that these guys can make the roster and play sparingly over the course of their rookie contract. One player in particular that I think will receive decent playing time in his rookie season in specific situations is tight end Jackson Halls. The Bills, as we know, love to run the football, they love to be the physical team, and Jackson Halls is certainly that as a tight end. Now, I will say for anybody who plays fantasy football, if Dalton Kincaid or Dawson Knox is out and you think that, hey, Jackson Halls is a tight end, Josh Allen's throwing him passes, he can come in and have a 5 reception day with the other out, that is not Jackson Hall's game. He is a 6th offensive lineman, and I would be very surprised if he has more than 15 receptions in his rookie season. He is going to come in 12 or 13 personnel situations, which is 1 running back, 2 tight ends, or 1 running back, 3 tight end situations, and be that 6th offensive lineman to be the lead blocker for James Cook or even Josh Allen when he keeps the football. He's a tone-setting tight end, and I think he is the exact type of player that, along with Landon Jackson on the defensive side of the football, that the Bills Mafia is going to love over the course of the next couple of years. The 2025 Bills offense. What is there for me to say that you guys already don't think or already don't know? Well, let's start off by saying this. They had 30 plus points in 8 straight games at a point last year, and after falling to the Texans in week 5 to fall to 3-2, they won 10 of their 12 remaining games, and one of the losses was to the Patriots in week 18, in which Joe Milton played for the Patriots and the Bills backups played the majority of the game. Their only real loss was to the Rams, in which they put up 40 plus points, so I wouldn't exactly say that loss was on the offense. Now, one of the most impressive parts about the 2024 Bills offense was not only the fact that they didn't have a 1,000-yard receiver or even 900-yard receiver, as Khalil Shakir led the team with 821 receiving yards, but the fact that they only turned the ball over 8 times in the 17 games in the regular season. And obviously, entering 2024, the narrative was that Josh Allen was a big turnover machine, and I always defended Josh, and Bills fans, if you guys do remember this, that a lot of his interceptions were taken extremely out of context. And I do remember one in particular against Miami a couple of years ago where it was 4th and 5 and they had the ball around the 40-yard line, and this was in week 18 of 2023, and Josh threw the ball to the end zone and it was an interception, but did it really matter when the Dolphins got the ball as a touchback rather than the Bills turning the football over at the 40-yard line for what was a plus 20 yard for the Bills? Because if Josh just threw an incomplete pass or took a sack or whatever, Miami would have got the ball at the 40-yard line rather than the 20-yard line from a touchback with the interception. So I always thought the Josh Allen interceptions narrative was taken extremely out of proportion, and in 2024, Josh had 40 total touchdowns and won the MVP. And in 2025, I wouldn't expect much different from the Bills offense. The everybody eats offense clearly works, and what also has to be factored in is the culture within the Bills locker room to be able to have the everybody eats offense. Now, I know there are some Bills fans nervous about the future of James Cook, and I will be honest, I think this is his final year in Buffalo, and I don't think he's going to sit out the entire 25 season in hopes of getting a new contract, but I think James Cook is a talented player. I don't think he's a top 3 or 4 player at the position, and obviously when you have Josh Allen, you can take away a lot of the responsibilities that a running back would need, simply due to the defense also having to factor in Josh Allen in every single play. Now, James Cook is a good running back in his own rights, but I don't think Buffalo is going to fork up $16 million or $18 million per year or whatever number James Cook wants. Now, for individual projections within the 2025 Bills offense, I know everybody's going to want to hear about Keon Coleman, as he had a disappointing rookie season, at least compared to his fellow 2024 draftees. I mean, you look at Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., Ladd McConkey, even Brock Bowers, although he's a tight end, all of these guys had over 1,000 yards, and Marvin Harrison Jr. nearly had 900 yards, and Rome Odunze also had over 700 yards too. And Keon Coleman had a 556-yard rookie season, and in 3 postseason games had 3 receptions for 22 yards. He couldn't couldn't separate at the NFL level, and it was a very, very frustrating year. He is just 22 years old entering 2025, and whenever you have a player that is selected by the Bills or the Chiefs or even the Bengals, a lot of the time, and even the Ravens too, a lot of the time you want to project the best for that receiver because they're going to a very good quarterback and they're going to a very good situation. But Keon cannot separate at the level of other NFL players, and that much was evident. However, he is just 22 years old, and I will credit Keon because at times I thought there was a little bit of an immaturity factor, but there was an interview a couple of weeks ago where he called his rookie season trash, in his words, not mine. Trash was his exact wording, and I do think that can only be viewed as a positive because he is acknowledging that I was not good enough to help my team win enough games and to ultimately get to the Super Bowl, and I know that I have to improve in 2025 and beyond. Khalil Shakir, to me, is all reliable. He's a really good player. He had over 800 yards receiving last year. I would expect much of the same, if not a little better, in 2025, and there's a reason the Bills gave him a contract extension, and I think he should be a Buffalo Bill, not just through that extension, but for several years. He's a guy that should stay in Buffalo for a very, very long time. Now, I thought Dalton Kincaid had a pretty disappointing second year, all things considered. I really thought that there was going to be a path where he wouldn't be Brock Bowers in 2024, but I thought there was a decent chance that he would come in 2024 after a good rookie season and maybe have a 75 reception, 750, 800 yard year, along with 7 or 8 touchdowns, and what we got was nowhere close to that. So this isn't a now or never year for Kincaid, but it's definitely a year where the pressure is on a lot more than what I thought it would have been based on where I thought he was entering 2024. And ultimately, I don't think it's a matter of Dalton Kincaid not having the ability to play at the NFL level, and I don't think he should be remembered for one specific drop on what was a very tough play to make in the AFC Championship game, and I think that this is a player that will get back on track over the course of the 25 season. Overall, I don't think Buffalo is going to have a big 12 or 13 or 1400 yard receiver, and that there's a reason that they have the everybody eats offense, because remember, for as good as Josh Allen is, and for as many plays as he makes where your jaw drops and basically say that, hey, he's one of maybe 2 or 3 players, or maybe even the only player in NFL history to make that specific play, he also runs the football, and whenever he has 500 or 600 rushing yards, along with 7, 8, 10, 14, 15 rushing touchdowns, inevitably that's going to take numbers away from other players within the offense. But at the end of the day, if they get the ring, if they win enough games, it's not going to matter, and everybody's going to be fine. Now, when you win your division, you are going to play a number 1 schedule, so you're going to play the Chiefs, the Ravens, and the Texans, and you're going to play those elite of elite teams, but guys, this is the year for Buffalo to get the number 1 seed because their schedule could be a lot worse. They also play the NFC South, and there's absolutely no reason that Buffalo shouldn't go 4-0 against the NFC South. No disrespect, I just don't think any of those teams, maybe outside of Tampa, are on or close to the level where Buffalo is. Again, outside of Tampa. This is a really complete team, and they went to the AFC Championship game last year. Again, I was wrong because I didn't think that they were going to go to the AFC Championship game last year, and they significantly outperformed their expectations. But the fact that they went to the AFC Championship game and significantly improved the roster from last year to this year, and also have a favorable regular season schedule, at least pertaining to them potentially getting the number 1 seed, guys, this is the year if Buffalo's going to do it. Buffalo's Super Bowl window is never going to be closed as long as Josh Allen is their quarterback, but there's probably going to be 1, if not 2, or even 3 more times where they have to reconstruct the roster like they did last offseason. And when you factor in the youth that they have on this roster, along with the limited pricey veterans that they have, this is going to be one of the better chances Buffalo has to bring the Lombardi home. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, as only about 43% of people watching are subscribed, and helps the channel tremendously. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.